There are questions that people carry their whole lives. Questions that appear in the middle of the night when everything is quiet and you are alone with your own thoughts. Questions that hurt, not because they have no answer, but because the answer may never come. One of them is this: how does someone abandon their own child? I do not know how to answer that, but I know a story. A story about a cold night, a door, a baby, and a man who grew up carrying a question that had no name. Hi, I'm Ben, and welcome to Whisk English. Before we start, I want to tell you something important. One of the most powerful ways to learn English is by listening to stories. Why? Because when you are inside a story, you forget that you are studying. You absorb new vocabulary, natural sentences, real pronunciation, all of that without effort, just by paying attention. Today's story is easy to understand. The words are simple. The sentences are short. You are going to learn a lot. So do this. Find a comfortable place to sit, grab a cup of coffee or tea, and relax. Because today, you are not going to study English. You're going to feel English. The story starts now. It was a November night, the kind of night that makes the whole world feel sad. Cold, thin rain hit the windows. The wind moved through the trees. The streets were empty, dark, and wet. There was nobody outside, nobody who wanted to be, at least. But there was a woman. Her name was Claire Dawson, 31 years old, dark hair soaked by the rain, red eyes, not from the cold, from crying. In her arms, wrapped in a faded blue blanket, was a baby. He was sleeping, completely unaware of the rain, the cold, the pain of the woman holding him. He slept with that peace that only babies have, that peace that breaks the heart of anyone who looks. Claire stopped in front of a house, a simple house, with a warm yellow light on in the living room window. She stood there for a long moment, looking at the door, looking at her son, looking at the door again. Her lips were trembling, not from the cold. She bent down slowly. She placed the baby on the ground in front of the small porch, protected by the small porch. She adjusted the blanket around him with shaking hands. She stayed there, crouching for a few seconds, looking at that small face, that tiny nose, those little closed fists. And then she did something that no words can describe properly. She stood up, she rang the doorbell, and she ran away without looking back. The rain swallowed her in seconds. The street was empty again, and the baby kept sleeping. The door opened. An older woman looked down and found the blue blanket, found the baby, found a small folded note tucked inside the blanket with only 3 words written by hand. Please take care. The woman looked at the empty street. There was nobody, only the rain, the wind, and the silence. She picked up the baby, held him close, walked inside, and closed the door. And that little boy's life began. His name was Daniel Hayes. That was the name the family who took him in gave him. Ruth and George Hayes were a simple couple. She was an elementary school teacher. He was a mechanic. They did not have much money, but they had something worth more than money. They had time. They had patience. They had the kind of love that does not make noise, but is always present in every small detail, in every quiet gesture. Daniel grew up knowing he had been found that night. Ruth and George never hid the truth from him. They would sit with him, look into his eyes, and explain with simple words and a calm voice. "Someone left you at our door, and we chose you." That was Ruth's sentence. She repeated it when Daniel asked, and Daniel asked a lot, especially at night when the silence became too big. Why did she leave? Ruth always held his hand before answering. "I do not know, my love, but I know she wrapped you in the warmest blanket she had, and I know she rang the doorbell. She wanted someone to open the door." Daniel kept those words. He kept them and turned them, as if there were an answer hidden inside them that he had not yet found. At school, Daniel was quiet, focused, the kind of student who sits in the front row not to impress anyone, but because he genuinely wants to understand. He had few friends, but the ones he had were for life. He loved to read. He loved to ask questions. He loved, above all, to understand how things work. It was in a science class when he was 12 years old that Daniel decided what he wanted to be. The teacher was explaining how the heart works, how it beats without stopping, day and night, without rest, without asking for anything in return. Daniel stared at the diagram on the board for a long time after the class ended, and he thought, "I want to take care of that. I want to take care of people." And that is exactly what he did. He studied with dedication for years. Nights turned into mornings over books, weekends spent inside libraries, scholarships earned through effort, university, medical school, residency, years and years of learning, of sacrifice, of choice. At 32 years old, Dr. Daniel Hayes was a doctor, a good doctor, the kind who looks patients in the eyes, who asks how the person is doing, really doing, not just physically, who sits by the bed and listens, who remembers that behind every diagnosis there is a story, a life, a human being. His patients never forgot him, and he never forgot them. Daniel had built a beautiful life, with his own hands, with effort, with difficult choices. He had learned to live with the question that was never answered. He had learned to carry the not knowing without letting him destroy him. But life has a strange way of closing circles, of bringing back what seemed lost forever. On an afternoon in March, a new patient was admitted to the hospital, and everything changed. She arrived alone, no companion, no family, nobody holding her hand. The name on the file was Claire Dawson, 63 years old. Daniel picked up the file without paying attention to the name. It was a long afternoon with many patients, and he was tired. He read the information quickly. He walked into the room and stopped. There was a woman in the bed, small, fragile, white, thin hair, skin too pale, eyes closed. She was breathing with difficulty, a shallow, tired breathing, like someone fighting to do something that should be simple. Daniel walked closer. He pulled the chair. He sat beside the bed. "Good afternoon," he said, with his usual calm voice. "My name is Dr. Hayes. How are you feeling?" She opened her eyes slowly, dark eyes, tired, with an old sadness inside them, the kind of sadness that did not come from today, that came from a long time ago and stayed. "Not very well," she said, with a low, rough voice. "I have not been well for some time." Daniel examined her carefully. He asked questions. He listened to the answers. He ordered tests. He came back the next day, and the next, and the next. Claire was seriously ill. Her heart was weak, her lungs struggling, her body tired of fighting. She needed intensive care, daily attention, someone who was present. And Daniel was present. Every day he walked into the room. He sat in the chair beside the bed. He asked how she had slept. He looked into her eyes. He listened. Sometimes they sat in silence together, and the silence was not heavy. It was the kind of silence that exists between people who understand each other without needing words. With time, Claire began to talk. She said she had lived alone for many years, that she had no family, that she had made decisions she regretted every single day. She did not say which ones, but her eyes did. Eyes always say what the mouth cannot. One evening, Daniel was sitting beside her when Claire looked at the ceiling and said with a voice so low he could barely hear, "I did something terrible a long time ago, and I never forgave myself." Daniel did not answer immediately. He stayed quiet, then said, "Most people I know carry something like that." Claire closed her eyes. "It is not like the others," she murmured. "What I did cannot be undone." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, at the white hair, at the thin, fragile hands on the sheet, at the face marked by time and by something heavier than time, and something inside him recognized her. Not her face had changed too much, but something in her eyes, something in the way she carried the pain, as if the guilt were a physical weight she had learned to walk with, but had never put down. Daniel went home that night and could not sleep. He lay there, looking at the ceiling, as he had done so many times as a child, with that same old question turning slowly inside him. But now there was something different. Now there was a face, and there was a guilt he recognized, even without ever having seen it before. In the morning, he returned to the hospital earlier than usual. There was something he needed to say, and there was only one right moment to say it. It was early morning. Soft light came through the room window. Claire was awake, looking outside. She turned her head when she heard the door. Daniel walked in. He closed the door carefully. He pulled the chair. He sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel took a deep breath and said, "Claire, I need to tell you something." She looked at him. "I grew up hearing that someone had wrapped me in the warmest blanket they had, that they rang the doorbell before leaving, that they left a note with 3 words. The woman who raised me repeated this every time I asked why my mother had left. She would say because she wanted someone to open the door." Claire was completely still. "The blanket," Daniel said, with a voice barely above a whisper. "What color was the blanket?" Claire opened her mouth. Something moved behind her eyes, something old, something that had been locked away for 32 years. "Blue," she said. "It was blue, faded, with small bears along the edge." Daniel did not answer immediately. He looked at his own hands, the hands that had learned to heal, the hands that had held the hands of so many frightened people, the hands that 32 years ago were tiny and closed, sleeping, wrapped in a faded blue blanket on the porch of a house on a November night. He breathed in slowly. He raised his eyes to Claire and said with a voice that was calm and broken at the same time, "I still have that blanket." Claire's tears came all at once, without warning, like a wall that finally breaks after years of holding everything back. Daniel leaned forward. He placed his hand over her hand, carefully, gently, with the same calm he had learned over years of caring for people in the hardest moments of their lives. "I am that baby, Claire." "How can you?" she whispered. "After everything?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, then said, "Because someone taught me that people deserve care, especially when they are at the worst moment of their lives. And because my whole life I wanted to find you, not to be angry, just to tell you that I was okay." Claire closed her eyes, and for the first time in 32 years, she breathed deeply, really deeply, like someone who has just put down a weight they had been carrying for far too long. Daniel stayed beside her for a long time, without rush, without words, simply present, as he had learned to be. Daniel cared for Claire in the months that followed with the same dedication he gave to all his patients, perhaps a little more, not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but because he had chosen to, because he had decided somewhere along the way that abandonment was not going to define who he was, that pain was not going to become anger, that he was going to take care of people, all of them, even those who did not deserve it, especially those who needed it most. Claire passed away on a quiet autumn morning, with Daniel beside her, with his hand holding hers. There is no right word for what that goodbye was. It was not joy. It was not only sadness. It was something in between, something human and complicated and true. It was a story that had finally reached its end, and that at the same time will never end. Because Daniel Hayes is still there, every day, walking into hospital rooms, sitting beside people who are afraid, holding hands, listening, caring, like someone who learned from a very early age that caring is the most powerful thing a human being can do. His name was Daniel, and he chose love, even when love was difficult, even when love was costly.